Once upon a time, in the gentle hills above Tiberias, where the wind curled through lemon trees and the Sea of Galilee shimmered like glass in the morning sun, there was a woman whose name was rarely spoken in crowds, but often whispered in heaven. Her name was Susanna. People didn't know much about her. She didn't preach to thousands. She didn't stand on temple steps or argue with teachers of the law. But she had something else, something strong and steady. A quiet kind of faith that didn't shout, but didn't shake either. This is her story, and it begins in a place of pain. The house was too quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet that wraps around you like a warm shawl. This was the kind of silence that pressed against your ribs, the kind that echoed, the kind that reminded you of all the sounds that used to fill the air: laughter, footsteps, prayers whispered from the next room. Susanna sat at the low stone table near the window, pouring water into a bowl with slow, careful hands. The motion was familiar, but her grip trembled, just enough to make the water slosh. Across from her sat an empty chair. It used to be her father's. He had died of a sudden illness 2 years ago, just weeks after whispering, "You'll be fine, little light. You've always had more strength than you know." It wasn't true. Not back then. Maybe not even now. Susanna had always been the quiet one in a wealthy house. She wasn't the loudest voice in a room or the first to speak at gatherings, but she had watched. She had listened. And over time, she had learned to carry the weight of decisions, servants, and sorrow, especially when the sickness began. It had started with fatigue. Then came the tremors. Her limbs grew heavy. Her voice wavered. Physicians tried everything: expensive oils, desert herbs, even secret rituals whispered from foreigners. None of it worked. Some said she was cursed. Some said she sinned, and some just stopped talking to her altogether. That silence was the worst part. People could accept a woman who was quiet by choice, but a woman made quiet by pain? That made them nervous. She had once managed her household. She had organized feasts, overseen olive harvests, given generously to the poor. Now, she barely made it through a morning without needing help to stand. Even walking from her bed to the courtyard left her exhausted. Still, every evening, she came here, to this chair, to pour water, to stare out the window, to sit across from the memory of a father who used to believe in her. That's where we find her now, alone in the fading light, remembering who she used to be. Until a knock broke the silence. "Lady Susanna?" came a voice from the stone archway. She didn't flinch. She already knew it was Miriam, her young cousin, barely 17 and full of energy Susanna barely remembered having. Miriam was sunshine in motion. Her sandals always slapped too loudly against the tiles. Her questions always came too fast, and she never stayed in one place for long. "I brought bread," Miriam announced, stepping into the room without waiting for permission. "And figs. Real ones, not the dried-out kind." "You didn't need to," Susanna said, her voice a little raspy. "I wanted to. Besides, I figured you'd forget to eat again." Miriam dropped the basket on the table and began slicing the bread without being asked. Susanna watched her, so full of life, so unaware of what it meant to feel like your own body was a betrayal. "You know," Miriam continued, "you used to be the one everyone wanted to be like." Susanna raised an eyebrow, amused. "That's a new one." "It's true. Mama used to tell stories about you. Susanna of Tiberias, wise, kind, the generous host with the beautiful garden and a heart for the poor." "That sounds like someone else." "No, it's you. Or it was." Susanna looked down at her shaking fingers. "Not anymore." There was a pause. Miriam set the knife down, her face softening. You're still her, you know. You still matter. You just don't believe it yet." Susanna's lip quivered. She didn't want to cry, not again. But it was hard being seen, harder still being remembered. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Miriam tore a piece of bread and handed it over. Then quietly, "There's a man. A teacher. He's coming to Magdala tomorrow." Susanna glanced at her. "Another healer?" "No, not like that. His name is Jesus. People say he doesn't just heal sickness. He sees people, really sees them. He forgave a woman caught in sin. He healed a leper no one would touch. And yesterday, someone said he called a tax collector to be one of his students." Susanna chuckled faintly. "Sounds reckless. Sounds like hope." Another pause. "I want to take you," Miriam said, "just for a little while. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. Just come. What if he sees you too?" Susanna stared at the window. The wind had picked up, brushing against the curtains like a whisper. Her heart was tired. Her body was tired. But somewhere underneath the ache, there was still a flicker. She didn't answer right away. But that night, after Miriam had gone, Susanna whispered 4 words into the silence. "If you're real, come find me." And with that, the quietest journey of her life began. The journey to Magdala was slow. Susanna hadn't walked that far in over a year. Miriam brought a borrowed donkey with gentle eyes and a thick gray coat, the kind used more for errands than travel. They wrapped Susanna in a soft cloak and helped her onto the saddle as the sun crept over the hills, burning off the morning mist. The road was uneven, but the sea in the distance gleamed like a promise, and Miriam never stopped talking. "They say he multiplies bread," she said, holding Susanna's hand to steady her. "And he speaks in riddles, stories really, parables. Some people don't get them, but they say if you're listening with your heart, not just your ears, you'll understand." Susanna nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She was already exhausted. Every bump in the road felt like a jolt to her spine, and her legs ached from holding herself upright. But something in her refused to turn back. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't pride. It was possibility. She didn't believe easily, but if there was even a sliver of a chance that this man Jesus could offer more than pity, more than shallow words, she had to see for herself. When they finally arrived, Magdala was already awake. Vendors lined the streets with fish and olives. Children darted between stalls, and an argument over prices carried across the water. But it wasn't the market that caught their attention. It was the crowd gathered along the shoreline. Dozens, maybe hundreds, had formed a loose semicircle by the water's edge. Men with weathered faces, women with baskets half full, old men leaning on staffs, and scattered among them, people like Susanna, worn, fragile, waiting. Jesus stood on the sand, not shouting, not raising his arms with showmanship. He wasn't dressed like a prophet or a king. No fine robes, no gold, just a plain tunic, dusty at the hem, and a gaze that seemed to reach people long before his words did. Susanna couldn't see him clearly from where she sat on the donkey, but she could hear him. His voice was calm and steady like water over stones. A sower went out to sow his seed. People leaned in. Children stopped squirming. Even the waves seemed quieter. Some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it. Some on rocky ground where it withered, but some fell on good soil and grew. Susanna closed her eyes. Something about his tone. It wasn't just a story. It was an invitation, as if he were saying, "You're still soil. You're not too dry. You're not too far gone." Miriam helped her down. guiding her slowly to the edge of the crowd. Susanna stood there, barely breathing, surrounded by strangers and fishermen and beggars. No one noticed her trembling hands. No one asked why she limped. But then, he did. He looked up. Not in a vague, sweeping gesture, but directly, toward her. Jesus paused mid-sentence, and in that single pause, Susanna felt something she hadn't felt in months. Seen. Not as a burden. Not as a woman who used to be useful. Not as a body failing too soon, but as a soul still breathing, still worthy. She wanted to look away but couldn't. He smiled. Not with pity, but with a strange kind of joy, as if he recognized her, as if her arrival had been expected, as if he had been waiting for her all along. Then he continued teaching, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Susanna knew better. Later, when the crowd began to scatter and people returned to their errands, Miriam squeezed her hand. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Susanna nodded slowly. "He saw you." "Yes." "What do we do now?" Susanna's voice was quiet. "We stay." That night they found a room to sleep in, cramped but clean. Miriam curled up in the corner, exhausted from the journey, but Susanna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange warmth still settled in her chest. She hadn't asked for healing. She hadn't spoken a word, but something had shifted. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The man on the shore would change everything, and not just for the loud, the bold, the obvious. He would change the lives of the faithful few who followed him in silence, women like her. The next morning, the streets of Magdala had barely begun to stir when Susanna rose from the mat. Her body groaned in protest, her back stiff, her legs unsteady, her joints aching from the long journey, but something had awakened in her. Not adrenaline, not excitement, something quieter. A steady courage, like coals that had lain dormant in her spirit for far too long. Miriam was still snoring softly in the corner, tangled in her shawl. Susanna wrapped herself in her outer cloak and stepped outside into the early light. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she didn't want to miss him if he passed by again. What she didn't expect was the woman waiting by the well. She was tall and strong-boned, with a thick braid coiled around her head like a crown. She looked up as Susanna approached and smiled. "You're the one he looked at yesterday, aren't you?" Susanna blinked. I'm not sure." "Oh, you are. I saw it. I'm Joanna." She held out a hand, steady and warm. "I travel with him, along with Mary of Magdala and a few others." "You're with him?" Joanna nodded. "As often as we're allowed. We help with food, oil, shelter. Sometimes we just listen. Sometimes we carry baskets. He says every role matters." Susanna's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I used to help people. I used to keep books for my father's shop, measure grain, sell pressed oils to temple women. I was good with numbers." Joanna's gaze was kind but clear. "Are you asking if you're still useful?" Susanna dropped her eyes. Joanna stepped closer. "He's not looking for usefulness. He's looking for faith." There was a long silence. Only the creak of the bucket at the well and the distant bleating of goats. Then Joanna added, almost as an afterthought, "We'll be baking bread later." Mary brought flour. "Come, if you'd like." Later that morning, Susanna found herself sitting on the floor of a small courtyard, her sleeves rolled up, her hands deep in a bowl of coarse barley flour. The sun beat down on the stone walls, and the smell of rising dough filled the air. Mary of Magdala worked beside her, singing softly as she kneaded. Across from them, Joanna poured oil into tiny jars to hand out to travelers. There was no sermon, no spotlight, no applause, but something holy was happening in that space. Susanna had never known the kingdom of God could look like this. Dough under her nails, laughter between women, the sound of sandals shuffling in the hallway as disciples passed through and thanked them with grateful smiles. At one point, a little boy ran in and grabbed a crust of warm bread off the table. Susanna laughed and called after him, "Hey, slow down, it's still hot." She hadn't heard her own laughter in weeks. It sounded strange and good. Joanna looked at her knowingly. "You feel it, don't you?" "What?" "This is what following him looks like. It's not always miracles. Sometimes it's just bread, oil, listening." Susanna sat back and stared at her floured hands. She didn't feel fully healed, not yet. But she felt seen, involved, real, like she wasn't fading anymore. She wiped a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, "If he'll have me, I want to stay." Joanna smiled, brushing flour from her palms. Then stay. That evening, after the bread was baked and the sun had dipped behind the hills, Susanna found herself sitting alone in the corner of the courtyard with a small bundle in her lap. It was wrapped in linen, plain, stiff from time, and knotted at the corners like her mother used to do. Inside were 3 silver denarii, a few bronze coins, and a necklace with a carved olive wood pendant. Nothing special, nothing extravagant. Just what she had left, a remnant from her old life, a quiet little pile of once upon a time. She stared at it in silence. These coins had once been meant for a dowry until her suitor backed out, claiming her condition would bring shame. Then they had been meant for doctor's fees, but no healer had offered more than temporary relief. Eventually, they became something to hoard. A plan B, her last measure of control in a life that had spun beyond it. But now she had seen a man raise his hand and silence fear. A man who knew things he shouldn't know and touched people others wouldn't touch. A man who looked at her not with pity, but with purpose. And she wanted in. Still awake? It was Joanna coming back from her errands with a basket on her hip. Susanna nodded. "I was just thinking." Joanna sat beside her, letting out a long sigh. "You'll do that a lot, if you stay with him." Susanna opened the cloth and let the silver glint in the fading light. "I don't know if this is foolish or faithful." Joanna didn't touch the coins. She just looked at her. "Sometimes they're the same thing." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't awkward. It was deep, like the kind of silence shared between 2 people staring into the same fire. "I want to give this," Susanna said quietly, "to help, for the journey, for bread, whatever he needs." Joanna raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to give all of it." "I know," Susanna replied. "That's why I want to." And she meant it. For once she wasn't giving out of fear or duty. She wasn't giving to earn healing or favor or someone's approval. She was giving because her heart had shifted. The woman who once counted copper pieces and tried to buy her way into wholeness was gone. Something new had been born, and new hearts give freely. Joanna took the bundle, rewrapped it gently, and held it against her chest. "He'll be honored by this." Susanna breathed in deeply, then let her shoulders fall. Joanna leaned in with a smile. "And don't be surprised if he never mentions it." Susanna blinked. "Why?" "Because he'll already know. You gave it to him before you ever handed it to me." The next day, Jesus and the disciples prepared to travel again. News had spread as it always did, and another town waited. As the group packed their belongings, Joanna passed the bundle discreetly to one of the treasurers, quiet, unnoticed. Susanna watched it go without flinching. She wasn't worried. Her part had been played, and she was still here, still following. It wasn't about money anymore. It never really was. It was about giving what you could, being where you were, and doing the next right thing, even when no one saw it but him. The road to 9 was narrow and dusty, carved like a ribbon into the dry hills. The sun beat down without apology, and flies buzzed around the traveling group as they walked, some ahead, some trailing behind. The air was full of the soft murmurs of sandals on dirt, the creak of baskets, and the low hum of quiet conversation. Susanna walked near the back, her tunic damp at the collar, her thoughts spinning faster than her feet. It had been 3 days since she gave her bundle. 3 days of simple meals, long walks, and stolen glances at Jesus when he spoke with others. She hadn't spoken to him directly since the day he healed her, but she was content to stay near, to observe, to learn, to carry things no one else wanted to carry. But that morning, things changed. As they rounded a bend in the road, she heard it, low at first, then louder. She follows too closely. She's just here because of Joanna. She gives coins and thinks it makes her one of us. Susanna slowed. The voices weren't loud, but they weren't hidden either. 2 women ahead of her, one with a braided cord around her waist, the other with a gold clasp at her shoulder. They didn't even look back, just kept walking. It wasn't the words that hurt, it was the truth in them. She had come because of Joanna. She had given coins. She was following from the edges, not really sure what her place was among this strange band of fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots. She was an outsider, stitched into the fabric at the last minute. Susanna stopped and let the others pass. She stepped off the road and sat beneath a crooked fig tree, brushing dust from her skirt. Her heart pounded strangely, half embarrassment, half something else she couldn't name. Was she foolish for coming? For thinking her quiet, behind-the-scenes service actually meant something? The branches above her rustled. A shadow fell across the ground. "Resting," a voice said gently. She looked up. It wasn't Joanna. It was him. Jesus stood there, not looking down on her, but with her, somehow, not impatient, not rushing, just present. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her thoughts scattered. He sat beside her. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence wrapped around them like shade. Then finally, he looked out toward the road and said softly, "Do you know what my Father sees?" Susanna blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He turned to her with the smallest smile. Faithfulness, not flair, not fame, just faithfulness. She swallowed. Even if nobody else sees it. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back against the tree, looked up into the branches and said, "There was once a poor widow who gave 2 copper coins." Susanna nodded. "I've heard that story." Jesus looked at her. "I haven't told it yet." And just like that, a laugh escaped her. It was quiet, surprised, but real. He smiled fully now. "I see you, Susanna. And your gift? It wasn't small." She felt her eyes sting unexpectedly. "But you know," he added almost in a whisper, "you're not here because of your gift." She tilted her head. "Then why am I here?" He stood, brushing off his robe. "Because your heart said yes." He offered his hand, not just to help her up, but as if to remind her she belonged. She took it. And in that moment, the whispers, the road, the coins, the questions, they all faded into something quieter. Faithfulness. That's what he saw. And that was enough. The next morning came with no grand announcement, just the scent of barley cakes warming over coals and the slow stirring of bodies waking beneath wool blankets and cloaks. Susanna moved quietly, as she always did, slipping from the sleeping area and folding up the cloth mats, her hands working even before her mind was fully awake. Across the field, Peter and James were already discussing the day's route. Joanna stood beside Mary of Magdala near the cooking fire, gently turning flatbreads with the edge of a shell. No one noticed Susanna much, and she liked it that way. But then Jesus did something unexpected. He came straight to her. "Susanna," he said gently, loud enough for others to hear, "come walk with me." Heads turned. The air shifted. She froze, a bit of flour on her cheek, her fingers still holding a rolled mat. "Now?" she asked. He smiled. "Now." She set the mat aside and followed. They didn't go far, just beyond the olive grove, near a patch of tall reeds where birds flickered in and out of the morning mist. "I need you to carry something important," he said. Her heart skipped. He reached into his outer robe and drew out a small bundle, tightly wrapped in dyed wool. "This letter. It's for a man we'll pass in Sychar. He's waiting for hope, but more than the message." He paused. "He needs to know someone remembered him." Susanna blinked. "You want me to deliver it?" "I want you to carry it. I trust you." That word, trust, did something to her chest. It both lifted and pressed down all at once. She nodded slowly. "Yes, of course. I won't let it out of my sight." He held her gaze. "And I want you to pray for him before you hand it over. Just a whisper. He won't hear it, but heaven will." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I will." As they walked back, she felt the bundle warm in her hand. It wasn't heavy, but it felt weighty, like carrying a secret sealed with purpose. But the others had noticed. Claudia, one of the younger women who joined from Cana, raised an eyebrow as Susanna passed. "Must be nice being singled out." Susanna said nothing. Another woman muttered under her breath, "Quiet ones always get the attention." She felt the sting, but held her head high. It wasn't about attention, not for her. Jesus had asked her to carry something, and she would. That night, as they camped near a bend in the river, Susanna didn't eat much. She sat alone beneath a tree, the wool bundle pressed gently to her chest. She wasn't just holding a letter, she was holding trust. And in the quiet, she whispered a prayer. "God, make me faithful with this small thing, even if no one else sees." Because she was learning. Quiet faithfulness didn't mean weakness. It meant being chosen for moments like this. The road to Sychar was dry and narrow, winding between hills where the shadows always seemed a little longer. The group had split into smaller clusters that morning, spreading out so they wouldn't draw too much attention. Susanna walked with just two others, Eleazar, a kind-eyed man from Galilee, and Miriam, who carried a jug of water tied tightly to her back. The letter was still tucked inside Susanna's robe, close to her heart. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Miriam froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" Susanna paused. A rustle, a low whisper, not wind, not bird. Then, footsteps. Too many. Before anyone could speak, 4 men stepped out from behind a low rock wall. Their eyes were hard, their tunics ragged. One held a curved blade, another had a thick wooden staff. "Travelers," the tallest said, smiling in a way that made Susanna's skin crawl. "Don't worry, we won't hurt you if you hand over your things." Miriam gasped. Eleazar stepped forward, hands open. "We don't have much, just food and water. Let us pass." The man with the blade laughed. "Then you won't mind if we look." One of them stepped toward Susanna. She backed away. "Please," she said, "we're peaceful." "Then don't fight," he said, reaching for her robe. But before he could touch her, Susanna turned quickly, slipping behind Eleazar, heart pounding. "Not the letter, please, not the letter." "What are you hiding?" the tall one growled. "Give it." Susanna shook her head. "It's not for you." A slap rang out, not to her, but to the side of Eleazar's face. He staggered, and Susanna's fingers clenched the edge of her robe tighter. But just then, hooves pounded in the distance. Another traveler's voice rang out, "Hey, leave them!" The attackers looked up, saw several men rounding the bend on donkeys, and cursed under their breath. One threw down Eleazar's satchel in frustration. Another kicked dust toward Susanna's feet. Then they scattered. Just like that. Susanna dropped to her knees, breath shaking. Miriam rushed to her. "Are you hurt?" "No," Susanna whispered, "but I almost failed." Eleazar sat beside her, rubbing his cheek. "You didn't fail. You didn't give in. That takes more strength than fighting." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I was scared," she admitted. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared," Miriam said. "It means you move forward anyway." Susanna blinked at her friend. "That's what he said too." "Who?" "Jesus. That day he gave me this letter." She touched her robe. "He knew it wouldn't be easy." Miriam's voice was quiet. "But he chose you anyway." Susanna nodded, and deep in her chest, something settled. This journey wasn't about comfort. It was about trust. And trust often walked through trouble before it reached triumph. Sychar was a quiet town nestled between sunlit hills and dust-blown paths. It wasn't large, but it carried a strange sense of history, like something important had once happened there and the stones still remembered. Susanna wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve as they entered the gates. Her legs ached from walking, and her heart still felt bruised from the ambush the day before, but the letter was still with her, and she was still standing. Miriam walked beside her, scanning the buildings. "Who exactly are we looking for?" Susanna took a breath. "His name is Ezra. Jesus told me he'd be near the well, said he comes every morning, though he rarely speaks." "That's all?" Susanna gave a tired smile. "That's more than I usually get." They made their way toward the old well at the center of the village. A few women were filling jars, and one man sat alone on the edge of the stone wall, tracing the ground with his sandal. That had to be him. Susanna stepped forward slowly. "Ezra," she asked gently. The man looked up. His beard was patchy, his eyes sunken. But there was something thoughtful about the way he stared at her, like he was searching for a memory he hadn't found in years. "Who's asking?" "I'm just a follower," Susanna said. "Of Jesus." His eyes narrowed. "I don't know him." She didn't blink. "Maybe not, but he knows you, and he sent this." She reached into her robe and pulled out the folded piece of parchment. Her hands trembled as she held it out. Ezra didn't move at first, just stared. Then slowly, he reached for it. He opened it without ceremony. No gasp, no tears, just stillness. Susanna waited, unsure if she should speak. But finally, Ezra whispered, "I wrote this." Susanna blinked. "What?" Ezra looked up. "Years ago, when my daughter died, I cursed God. I scribbled my anger on a scroll and buried it here, near this well. Then I walked away from everything." "But," he held up the letter, "this isn't what I wrote, but it is what I needed to hear." Susanna stepped back, stunned. "I don't understand," she said. "Jesus gave me this, said it was for you." Ezra let out a broken breath, then chuckled. "Then maybe he rewrote my cry into something holy." He looked up at her, eyes gleaming now. "You walked all this way for me?" "I didn't know it was you," Susanna said softly. "I just obeyed." Ezra closed his eyes. "Then thank you. You didn't just carry a message. You brought me home." They stood in silence for a long time. Around them, the world kept spinning. Children laughed. Jars were filled. Donkeys brayed. But for that moment, a soul had returned to the path. And Susanna felt full. Not loud. Not famous. Just faithful. Ezra insisted they stay the night. He had little. A stone house on the edge of the village, a threadbare mat, and a bowl of lentils that he apologized for 3 times. But the fire in his hearth glowed with a warmth that couldn't be measured in coin or comfort. Susanna sat near the fire as night fell, her legs wrapped in a blanket Miriam had found. Ezra sat cross-legged across from her, the letter laid gently between them like a sacred scroll. "I still don't know how he knew," Ezra murmured, shaking his head. "I never told anyone about the letter. I barely remembered it myself. But the words, they spoke to something I buried even deeper than the parchment." Susanna smiled gently. "He sees what no one else does, even the things we forget we're still holding." There was a long pause. "Do you know what it said?" Ezra asked. "The letter." She hesitated. "I only know it started with your name. After that, I just trusted it would be enough." Ezra nodded slowly. "It was. He called me son of the well. He said my sorrow didn't disqualify me. It made room for grace." Miriam looked up from the corner where she'd been laying out her shawl as a pillow. "That sounds like Jesus." Ezra chuckled, the first real laugh he'd offered since they'd arrived. "I want to meet him." Susanna's smile deepened. "You will." The next morning, the ripple began. Ezra, who hadn't spoken to his neighbors in nearly 3 years, walked to the well and told the old man who sold olives that he had forgiven God. Then he told the widow who baked flatbread that there was still hope. Then he stopped by the teacher's courtyard and asked if he could borrow a scroll of the Psalms. By midday, word had spread, not about Susanna, not about the journey, but about Ezra, the man who had been lost and came back home. Susanna stood near the gate watching a young boy chase a goat down the alleyway and felt a strange ache in her chest. "You okay?" Miriam asked, stepping beside her. "I didn't know the letter would change him like that," she whispered. "You thought it would be smaller?" Susanna nodded. "I thought it would be quiet, like me." Miriam nudged her shoulder. It was quiet, but quiet doesn't mean weak. Just then, Ezra approached them, breathless. I'm going with you, he said. Wherever he is, wherever you're going, I want to see him with my own eyes. Susanna blinked, surprised. You'll leave Sychar? Ezra smiled. If he could find me here with a letter, I want to find him with my life. The ripple had become a wave, and Susanna, who never saw herself as brave, had just changed someone's direction forever. The road to Jerusalem was uneven, both in stone and in spirit. Ezra had joined them early that morning, his old pack slung over his back, still smelling faintly of dust and time. He didn't say much as they walked, not because he lacked words, but because he was learning how to listen again. Susanna noticed the way he took in everything, birds singing in the reeds, a shepherd humming to his flock, the wind sighing through almond trees. She admired it, and yet something tugged inside her. She had started this journey quietly, humbly, supporting Jesus from the shadows. But now, people were noticing. Ezra had told two strangers at a well that Jesus had changed his life without even having met him yet. And those strangers? They promised to tell others. It felt good. It felt powerful. But it also scared her. That night they camped near a grove just outside Jericho. Miriam had gathered figs and built a fire. Ezra strummed a broken string lyre he'd found at a roadside stall, and Susanna sat a little apart, staring into the flames. "You've been quiet," Miriam said, handing her a fig. "I've always been quiet," Susanna replied softly. Miriam smirked. "Yes, but tonight you're quiet and thinking. That's dangerous." Susanna smiled faintly, then sighed. "Ezra speaks with such fire. I envy it a little." "You? Envy?" Miriam laughed. "You, the woman who left everything to follow a teacher she barely knew? The one who brings letters across mountains and turns funerals into revivals?" "That's not how I see it," Susanna whispered. "Maybe it's time you saw what we see." Just then, Ezra approached, carrying a small clay jar. "For you," he said, offering it to Susanna. She blinked. "What is it?" "Oil. From Sychar. For your feet. You've carried more than you should have." Her eyes welled before she could stop them. "Thank you," she said, voice catching. Ezra knelt to place the jar beside her. "You lit something in me, Susanna, not with preaching or shouting, but with consistency, with kindness, with faithfulness no one saw except God." She didn't answer, but her silence wasn't shame this time. It was reverence. That night, Susanna lay beneath the stars, her feet still tingling from Ezra's gift, and she realized something. Quiet flames don't flicker out. They spread, not with noise, but with purpose, and in the dark, they shine even brighter. By mid-morning, the walls of Jerusalem loomed into view, ancient, imposing, and busy with travelers. Caravans rattled past, their wheels groaning under clay jars and baskets of dyed cloth. Roman soldiers stood stiff at the gates, watching every movement with the cold indifference of men too used to power. But Susanna didn't feel awe as she approached the holy city. She felt a strange sadness. It had been years since she'd walked these roads, back when she was just the merchant's daughter, expected to marry well and speak only when spoken to. Her footsteps echoed against the stone path now, but her identity had changed completely. No longer tethered to status or family name, she belonged to something greater, to someone greater. Still, that didn't mean everyone saw it. As the trio approached the gate, a man in dark blue robes stepped directly in their path. He was tall, well-fed, and smelled faintly of saffron, a temple scribe by the looks of him. "Women traveling alone?" he said, raising an eyebrow as he looked Miriam and Susanna over. "And with him?" He gestured toward Ezra, who was holding a scroll as if it were something sacred. Ezra opened his mouth to speak, but Susanna stepped forward first. "We have business in the city. We're not alone. We're with the teacher." The man scoffed. "You mean that teacher? The one who eats with sinners and claims to forgive sins?" He laughed sharply, his voice drawing the attention of nearby vendors. "You'd do better following a real rabbi. This Jesus of Nazareth, he's trouble." Susanna didn't flinch, though her heart raced. "He's more than a rabbi. He's the Messiah." The man's smile faded. "You sound just like the Galileans, full of fire and nonsense." He turned, muttering, "Blasphemy has spread to the women now." They walked past him in silence, but Susanna felt the sting of his words, not because they hurt, but because they sounded exactly like the voices from her past, back when she wasn't brave enough to answer. Miriam touched her elbow. "Are you all right?" Susanna nodded slowly. "I'm just remembering who I used to be." Ezra leaned in, whispering, "And seeing how far you've come." She gave a soft, tired smile. "Something like that." As they entered the outer courts of the temple, they were met by noise, pigeons cooing, coins clinking, voices bargaining, sandals scuffing. Yet in all the noise, Susanna felt her spirit grow still. She wasn't here for their approval. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here for him. Later that evening, as they rested in a small upper room borrowed from a friend of Miriam's, Susanna sat by the window and watched the sun dip behind rooftops. Ezra was writing something by candlelight. Miriam hummed a psalm as she folded cloaks, and Susanna whispered a prayer she hadn't dared voice in a long time. "Lord, let my quiet life make a loud echo in heaven." She didn't need applause or titles or robes with tassels, just Jesus. And that was more than enough. The next morning, Jerusalem felt different. Not just busier, but heavier, as if the very stones were holding their breath. Word had spread that Jesus was teaching again, this time in Solomon's colonnade. Crowds were beginning to stir, gathering in clumps near the temple courtyard, some with joy, some with scorn. Susanna had risen early. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching as people filed in with expectant eyes and muttering mouths. She clutched her cloak tighter, her heart pounding, not from fear of being recognized by officials, but from something stranger: recognition. Across the courtyard, past a vendor selling roasted figs and a group of scholars in a heated debate, stood someone she hadn't seen in years. Her older brother, Simeon. He was taller than she remembered, his beard now streaked with gray, but his stance was the same: arms crossed, mouth tight, always watching, always calculating. He was speaking with a Pharisee, nodding slowly, then glancing up, straight at her. Her breath caught. For a moment, they just stared. He started walking toward her. Miriam noticed first. "Do you know him?" Susanna nodded slowly. "That's my brother." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "The one who disowned you?" "The very one." She tried to steady her heart, but her legs had already locked in place. He stopped a few feet away. The crowd buzzed around them, but for Susanna, the noise faded into silence. "I didn't expect to see you here," Simeon said, his voice even, almost formal. "I could say the same," Susanna replied. His eyes scanned her. "You left everything, you know. Mother wept for weeks. And yet," she said quietly, "I found something worth more." Simeon's eyes darkened. You really believe he's the Messiah? I really do. There was a pause. Somewhere in the colonnade, Jesus was beginning to speak. His voice carried in the morning air, firm, kind, full of weight. Simeon turned slightly toward the sound, then back to her. I came to prove you wrong, he admitted. I thought I'd watch this so-called teacher trip over his own lies. But now, I'm not so sure. Susanna felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She expected blame or judgment or another angry goodbye, but not this. Then stay, she whispered. Just listen. Simeon didn't reply, but he didn't walk away either. He turned to face the colonnade, folded his arms, and stood beside her. For the first time in years, they stood shoulder to shoulder, not saying a word, but sharing something far deeper, the start of healing. Susanna didn't weep. She smiled. The quiet kind that comes when God does something you stop praying for. And in the background, Jesus kept speaking. Words that healed, words that called, words that built a kingdom not just of rulers and rebels, but of sisters and brothers once lost. It happened faster than anyone could have expected. One day, Jesus was teaching in the temple courts. The next, soldiers were marching. Whispers turned into shouts, and the city turned cruel. Susanna didn't sleep the night of his arrest. Word had spread like wildfire. Judas, one of the 12, had betrayed him. Jesus had been taken, questioned, beaten. Peter had denied him. And now he stood trial before Pilate, wrapped in silence while the crowd screamed for his death. Susanna pushed through the crowd at Golgotha, every step feeling heavier than the last. Miriam gripped her hand, her face pale and tear-streaked. Joanna was somewhere behind them, and Mary Magdalene walked just ahead, her back ramrod straight despite the sorrow leaking from her eyes. Jesus was already hanging, nails through flesh, blood soaking wood, thorns pressed into his brow like a cruel crown. Susanna fell to her knees. The sky, once bright, had turned gray. Not from clouds, from grief, from glory withheld. She couldn't stop staring. This was the man who had looked into her soul and called her healed. This was the teacher who saw her, not for what she gave, but for who she was. And now he was dying. Simeon found her just as the light began to fade. His voice cracked as he said, he didn't fight back. Not once. She nodded slowly. Because this was his choice. Simeon knelt beside her. I don't understand. I don't either, she whispered, but I still believe. The earth began to tremble. The sky went black. A Roman guard fell to his knees and cried out, surely this man was the Son of God. And Susanna, with shaking hands and a heart breaking open, whispered, yes, he was. But something deep in her spirit added one more word. Is. Because even as his body hung lifeless on the cross, hope stirred like a flicker in the dark. The morning after the Sabbath was still in gray, the kind of morning where silence felt sacred. Susanna walked with Joanna and Mary Magdalene, jars of spices wrapped tightly in their arms. No one spoke. The grief had settled into something quieter now, not less painful, but deeper, like a weight pressed into their bones. The tomb had been sealed, guarded, final, but their love wouldn't let them stay home. As they reached the garden, Susanna slowed. Something was wrong. The stone was rolled away. Joanna dropped her jar. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. Mary Magdalene ran ahead, heart pounding. Susanna followed, chest tight, breath caught in her throat. Inside it was empty. The cloth was folded. The body was gone. Then, light. A voice. Not angry, not harsh, just steady. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Susanna turned, eyes wide. Two figures, clothed in light brighter than anything she'd ever seen, stood inside the tomb. "He is not here," one said. "He has risen." Mary Magdalene dropped to her knees. Joanna gasped. But Susanna, she just smiled. Because the flicker that had lived in her soul, the quiet flame that had kept her faithful, was now a wildfire. He was alive. They ran. They ran back to the disciples. Susanna's feet ached, but she didn't stop. Her voice, usually soft, rang loud with every step. "He's alive." Thomas didn't believe them. Most didn't. But that didn't stop her. Not now. She had seen an empty tomb. She had heard the truth. And in the days that followed, when Jesus appeared again, first to Mary, then to the others, Susanna was there, always quietly at the edge, but always faithful. She didn't write letters like Paul. She didn't preach in the temple like Peter, but she funded their travels. She fed their bodies. She carried water and courage and steadiness, because not every flame burns in the open. Some burn quietly, faithfully behind the scenes, and in Susanna's case, that quiet flame never went out.